This is the skin of a film reviewer, Bella. Now, before we dive into the episode, I want to give a massive shout out to Trapdoor Social. This is a band I have been listening to for going on 11 years at this point, and when I reached out to their frontman, Skylar Funk, in regards to requesting permission for their music use on my channel, he was incredibly gracious and incredibly welcoming to the idea. So, sincerely, thank you so much, bud. I'm going to be linking both their YouTube and Spotify links in the description below. So I not only recommend you checking out their discography in general, because they've got a lot of really great material over the years, but specifically, they're coming out with a new album at the end of this month, specifically on the 23rd, and it's called Echo Bloom. I highly recommend you check it out. Again, some of their music is going to be in the video. Again, thank you so much for the use. This has got to be one of the most fascinating series to analyze I've ever come across thus far. Because I can't think of another series in film or television where nearly everything and everyone surrounding the main characters are vastly more interesting than what we're being forced to give a single shit about. And just so we get the cringe out of the way, let's get this montage done so I can get to the actual good bits. Now, yes, the main love triangle, in case you haven't already pieced it together, is cringe and toxic and just overall bad. And yes, there are also some issues in terms of co-opting Native American lore for the purposes of the story. But I specifically want to get into some of the other reasoning as to why this franchise blew up the way it did. Now, for a far more insightful look into the book information being adapted to the screen, as well as going into more detail with the Native American issues that I mentioned, I would highly recommend checking out both Dominic Noble's Lost in Adaptation series, as well as Amanda the Jedi's Retrospective series. They both do a far better job at adding a larger context to a lot of the questions that you may have when you're first viewing this series. But even without the full context of the books, I personally feel these films do a pretty good job at giving us enough detail in themselves to still make us appreciate the supporting elements that we see. Now, we all know my biggest talking point. It's the thing that I literally hinted to in the thumbnail. But before we do dive into that, I actually just want to take a little bit of time and talk about the Cullen family as a whole. Putting aside the fact that the actors are clearly adults playing teenagers, the story of a group of traveling vampires doing their best to blend in and not drink human blood is actually a cool concept to me. Throw in the fact that some of them have pretty interesting abilities, and it's a solid setup to take the story in any direction that you'd really want to. Alice is my second favorite of the family. Much like everybody else, her backstory isn't really explained in the films, but she has future vision. And what's more, she seems to be one of the very few vampires who's had an ability before she got turned. In the books, she was committed to a loony bin, and it was because of the fact that she was already having visions of the future. And though everyone except Rosalie welcomes Bella into the family almost immediately, Alice seems to be the only one outside of Edward, obviously, who treats her incredibly warmly and is already counting her amongst the family. I don't have a lot to say about Emmett, past him being the fun, protective older brother who's the lovable meathead. But there's something about his perceived simple-mindedness that brings a level of warmth. In the book, he's much more of a friend to Bella, and it's shown just how much in love he is with Rosalie. And though it's never outright stated, you can tell by his stature that he's the powerhouse of the group and that his enhanced ability is strength. In both book and movie, he's always down for any fight that comes a family's way, and he's absolutely supportive of Bella becoming one of them, despite his brother and his wife's objections. I know that Rosalie spends most of the series despising Bella, but she ends up becoming one of Bella's best friends, and it actually boils down to two major events. The first being her honest admission as to how she became a vampire and how Bella is making the wrong choice by giving up her mortality. It shows a level of trust and understanding between the two. And Rosalie knows Bella is going to make the choice, but she still says in a very caring way,
I'm really sorry to both of you for how I've acted, and I'm really grateful that you were brave enough to go and save my brother. But this isn't a life I would have chosen for myself. And I wish that there had been someone to vote no for me. So no.
The other is when Bella is on her way back from the honeymoon after learning she was pregnant. She calls Rosalie first and foremost because she knows that Rosalie will protect her against all the others, because Rosalie had specifically told her about her desire to have nothing more than children and a family. So she knew that Rosalie would understand what she's currently going through, and she was 1000% correct. Rosalie immediately becomes a ride or die for Bella and only ever leaves her side if Bella clearly tells her that she's gonna be okay. And Rosalie is actually able to fight through her bloodlust once she sees the baby itself, making sure that it stays safe until Bella is better. Now, this is by no means me saying I don't think Nikki Reed is super cute, because she is. This is just my opinion, so everybody can calm down. But in the books, her character is described as the most beautiful person in the world. But somehow on screen, her sister and her mom are cuter than her, so...
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now, admittedly, Esme doesn't get a lot of time to shine within the films themselves, but from what time we do get with her, it's clear that she is a supportive and a loving mother figure. She's very open to the idea of her and Edward dating in the first place. Later in the series, she's very supportive about Bella's decision to become a vampire. And even to some of the smaller things later on in the series, like when the werewolves are defending the Cullen house, she's the one who takes the time to go out and make sure they have something to eat. We're not going to touch on Jacob, though, because,
This happened during the Civil War.
I was the youngest major in the Texas Cavalry.
Did you own slaves? Tara?
Now, the Cullens are only one faction within the overall narrative. There are also two more that come into play, the Kuliet tribe and the Volturi. Now, again, please see the other reviews I mentioned about the liberties taken with history and the whole imprinting thing. But I really appreciate getting another group of supernatural people who really want nothing more than just to be left alone, and who only get roped into the bullshit because one of their own couldn't calm the hell down. And I won't get into detail about this particular point, because again, the other reviews I mentioned go into wonderful detail, but I gotta give a shout out to Leia in the tribe. I mean, she's a serious real one, and I just wish we got more screen time with her. As for the Volturi, you just gotta love evil, smug European vampires. I mean, Michael Sheen really hammed it up with some of the greats, like Tom Cruise, Gary Oldman, and Richard Roxburgh. He goes from serious to silly with the flair of a stage actor, and it's just so entertaining to watch. Not to mention, there's another ruling member called Marcus. Now, he gets almost no lines within the films themselves, but obviously he's expanded upon in the books. But even from the few lines we get from him in the films, he's clearly shown to be just beyond tired of his extended experience and existence. I mean, shit, in the last battle, he literally welcomes death. Alright, all of my appetizers are out of the way, so you know what it's time for. Let's talk about some dads. Let's strip most everything away and just look at the first film through Charlie's perspective. It becomes a story about a man trying to reconnect with his daughter while simultaneously attempting to investigate and stop a series of gruesome murders in his town, being up against supernatural forces beyond his knowledge or skills. I would watch the hell out of that kind of movie or series. Are you kidding me? I would saw off one of my arms to get something of that quality. One of the victims was even a lifelong friend of his, and you can see just how upset he is by it.
Dad, I'm really sorry.
No, I'm going on 30 years.
When we first meet Edward, there's a joke just beforehand about Charlie threatening him with a shotgun, but when they actually meet, Charlie is actually nice. Maybe it's just him being polite for the sake of his daughter, or a level of respect for Carlisle, or maybe even both. But I appreciate they didn't do the whole, "you better not mistreat my daughter or there'll be hell to pay" cliche that often pops up. At the end of the first film, even after, from his perspective, Bella and Edward got into a massive fight and broke up, which kind of resulted in her injuries, he doesn't actually make any objection about her getting back with him and going to prom together. When Bella becomes depressed after the Cullen family leaves, he does all he can to be there for her and helps during her panic attacks during the night. But he swiftly realizes that his best in this situation isn't enough, and he at least tries to get Bella away from the town so she can get some sort of breathing room and perspective about the whole thing. Jacob, being the hairy dumbass that he is, reveals the complexity of the situation, and even though he's completely freaked out and mostly being left in the dark about what's actually happening, Charlie stays steadfast in his commitment to his daughter. I mean, he's father of the year, father of the decade, father period. He's the best around. And I am glad that throughout all the bullshit that he's had to put up with throughout this franchise, Charlie was actually able to meet somebody new. Now, there are only a few lines of dialogue, and it's mostly happening in the background, but you know damn well he got to open that QLED box, you know what I mean? You know, the quissy, if you will.
You need to leave!
Moving on to Carlisle. Now, it's only very briefly mentioned in the films, but Carlisle used to be a member of the Volturi. It was his experience with them and seeing their brutality firsthand that made him attempt to do the best he can with the curse he was given. He becomes a man of medicine, learning to keep his patients safe by feeding on animals rather than them, and as the years go by, he grows his family and passes on the lessons he's learned. Not to mention, he brokers a peace with the wolves and shows them there can actually be good vampires. Likewise, the family sees that shapeshifters aren't the monsters and brutes like the Volturi claim them to be. The saddest and most noble thing about Carlisle is revealed shortly after Bella's injury in the second film. The two are alone in his office while he's bandaging her up when he says this.
I knew who I wanted to be. I wanted to help people. Brings me happiness, even if I am damned regardless.
Despite the fact that he still sees himself as a monster and doomed to a life of ill fate, he's still doing all he can to show love, compassion, and healing. It's heartbreaking, but heartwarming. He's never pushy, he never yells at anyone in his family, and every decision he makes is always for the greater good of the family. So, hopefully you've now understood what I meant at the start of this episode when I said this series is fascinating. And just in case none of my major points really did it for you, let me get my random points out that I couldn't find any better place to really slot into the script. First and foremost, the baseball scene is rad, and I'll die on that hill any day of the week. If I was a vampire, you're damn right I'd want to see if I could hit a double off Carlisle in his fastball. I'd be the greatest first baseman in the world in that case. And as small as it may be, not a lot of people picked up on the fact that the wolves that Jacob mentioned in his story in the first film actually show up in the first film's credits as a tease to what's coming in the next film. Also, people sometimes make fun of the scene where Bella is getting ready to swim and have sex with Edward, but y'all know goddamn well that you do the same thing when you're about to have company over. You do it, I do it. Let's just be adults and admit that. Because I'm not monetized, so I'm allowed to say this right now. If somebody said they want to come over and give me that sloppy toppy, you know, that macaroni sound, sure as God's got sandals, I'm going to make sure I'm shaved and presentable. It's the least I can do. Finally, and again, I know imprinting is gross and wrong, and it's all those things, but the scene where Bella finds out is the best scene in the franchise. Because Jacob is nervous as hell while everyone around him is snickering in the background because they know shit's about to go down. Rose and Emmett straight clown him.
Do tell her, Jacob.
This should be good.
And then Bella literally takes Jacob outside by his neck like a bad dog. It's incredible. Okay, thank God. I finally got all of my feelings out about this series so I can check it off my list and I never have to think about this again. If you've made it to this point, massive thank you for checking out the episode and being a viewer of the channel. I was gonna put a 6 Degrees of Muppets segment in here, but I just had to sit through fucking 5 films of all this and put this all together, so you're gonna have to forgive me if I'm a little bit exhausted after all this. So again, thank you for watching. I'm not entirely certain what I'm gonna do next for the channel. I got some ideas, but you're just gonna have to let me wing it for a little while. Take care.
Stop the presses!
I changed my mind. I have just enough energy in the tank left. Let's play another round of, what are we going to call this one? Bella's bald, blood-sucking baby bonanza. Yep, we're going with that one. This franchise starred Kristen Stewart, who was also in Adventureland with Jesse Eisenberg, who was in Zombieland with Woody Harrelson, who was in White Men Can't Jump with Wesley Snipes, who was in Blade Trinity with Ryan Reynolds, who was in Bullet Train with Sandra Bullock, who was in Season 1, Episode 7 of The Muppets Tonight Show in 1996. You can feel free to be impressed, jealous, and or aroused in any order that you'd like. Seriously, again, thank you for watching. Again, no idea what's coming next, but I'll figure it out in the next week or two. But as always, I'm curious. What do you think?
Musical styles are still a very important form of communication for our young people. Hi, I'm Joe Feinstein.